acceptable, but no longer.
Now, Sam and Joe, you've also said
Can I give
that...
an illustration?
No, well, let me pick up this next. You've also said that because these guys have put some of the, in the margins, some of the different readings, you've cussed them out for doing that.
Well, one of the things, he's talking about updating English, and one of the things that's been pointed out is they keep saying, well, no doctrine has changed, no doctrine has changed. The Bible is not just used to teach doctrine, it's used to preach righteousness. An example of a real problem with the New King James is 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 3, where it says that in the latter days men will be without natural affection. The Greek is without natural affection. The King James Bible is without natural affection. Without natural affection is homosexuality. Without natural affection is child abuse. And without natural affection is a mother that can drive her children into a affection is the animal rights crowd that is more worried about animals or trees than they are about unborn babies. NIV takes that and says unloving, and the New King James says without love. Or it may be switched, maybe without love and unloving. Well, unloving is not without natural affection.
But it is the meaning of the Greek word.
But it says, hey, mine says...
Storgos, isn't that right, Dan?
Well, my Greek authority says without natural affection. Now, we have two Greek authorities.
It refers to family love, a familial love that members of a family would naturally have.
Yeah, but you see,
what is your Greek authority?
The Greek authority I had was, right here.
That's another
Well,
thing.
the one I'm using. This is...
Not to jump in and interrupt, but that's something that's driving me nuts with the guys on the other side of the table here. They criticize, Ripplinger, among others, criticizes every lexicon out there as being liberal or biased or whatever. Yeah, I'd like to know what lexicons you have to use. If you criticize all of them, where do you get the words?
Well, if you look...
Your Greek authority.
Well, when I say Greek authority, I'm talking about for that. This is the Greek English New Testament, interlinear King James.
That's not a lexicon.
No. And it says, when I turn to that verse, it says right under there, without natural affection.
But that means that somebody that wrote the interlinear wrote the definition in there. And what they're asking, what they're asking is, where did that guy get his information? They're saying the way you get the lexicons is you look at the papyri, you look at all the books, you look at the ostraka, the everything that was written at that time, and you catalog how the words were used by Jesus and the apostles. That becomes your dictionary, just like Webster's, okay? Now, if that's how they used it, that's your starting point. They're saying, okay, that's what the word means. Now, the next thing is, how do you get that over? If it has changed in terms of our culture, how do you say that same meaning in our cultural setting? They have done that.
Certainly, they step outside the lexicon. One of the clearest is in the NIV, where now Paul says, "I'm Hebrew of Hebrews." That is translated Hebrew of Hebrews. But every place the language Hebrew is referred to, it's translated Aramaic, and it's the Greek word for Hebrew.
Let's take some examples, James.
Gail Ripplinger, in her book, cites a passage, and since you indicated you were going to be taking her position, she cites a passage, Revelation 14:1. And she says there's a grand conspiracy and that the modern translations are attempting to move us into Lucifer's world order and so on and so forth. And one of the examples she gives is that the King James Revelation 14:1 is missing a phrase, and that is in fact found in all the modern translations, and in point of fact has the vast majority of textual support behind it. There are a very small number of manuscripts that do not contain the question phrase in Revelation 14:1 taking his name and the name of his father.
Read the text first of all, so our audience knows what you're talking about.
Well, depending on which text you want to take it from, if
take
someone
King
has
James. We'll start with King James.
The King James itself, Revelation chapter 14, verse 1, is talking about, of course, the vision of the Lamb and the 144,000, so on and so forth. And when it talks about those people, it says, beginning at verse 1, "And I looked, and lo, a Lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written in their foreheads." The modern translation saying, having his name and his father's name. King James only advocates like Gail Ripplinger will say this is a corruption of the Scriptures, that this is somehow meant to help people receive the mark of the beast. And yet, in point of fact, as anyone will point out in looking at the manuscripts themselves, the vast majority of manuscripts, only a small number, don't have that phrase. It was accidentally left out, and it's easy to explain the process whereby it was left out. In the few manuscripts that Erasmus had available to him, in fact, he only had one when he was working with Revelation. He borrowed Johannes Reuchlin's manuscript. Now, the reason, what I've got to ask you, sir, is if you are taking that position, if you make the TR the standard by which even our spirituality and our orthodoxy is to be measured, when here we have what's obviously an error in the TR, just not due to any malice of forethought, but just an error in the TR. How can you defend that as being the final authority? How
Okay,
can
we're going
you
to have
say
the
it's a problem?
question answered. We're going to take a break, and we'll have Joe and Sam answer it when we come right back. Stick with us. All right, we're back, and we're continuing our conversation. Which English translation of the Bible is the most accurate, the most reliable? Gail Ripplinger and others assert that the translators of the New English versions of the Bible hold beliefs which other Orthodox Christians would find shocking. And she's also said that these guys sitting right here are in agreement with Luciferians, occultists, and New Age philosophy. Now, a question's been asked about Revelation 14:1, and Sam, we need you to pick that up right there.
All right, one of the things that Jim said was that it was the King James reading as it is in a...
Very late manuscripts, yes.
That is why I don't stake my hope on the Textus Receptus. I can give you an example. Luke chapter 14, verse 5, it says, if a man have an ass or an ox and they fall into a ditch on the Sabbath, will he not straightway pull it out? NIV, New American Standard, both say if a man have a son or an ox and they fall in a ditch. And the son, that reading is TR. The King James in that point follows, I believe it's Aleph. What I'm saying, I believe when the King James translator sat in that room, not inspiration, because inspiration would have been starting with a blank sheet of paper, but I believe God led them to put in this book exactly what he wanted, and if he did that by letting them do it by one reading of one manuscript, I have no problem with it.
That was a blank, Dan.
What would you say that, Dan?
That was a blank. It may not be a blank sheet of paper, but it's a blank space in the text. So
Well,
you may
more
have
or less.
micro
No,
inspiration.
it's not a blank sheet in the text. If you have two texts that read both ways and you make a choice, that's not a blank. That's not.
Let me
What
ask
does
you
that do
this.
to the
Is
whole
one-
document?
You can't change that.
Is
What
the
does that
King
do to the
James...
preservation idea? Excuse me, but
That's exactly what preservation is.
well, you've been arguing for preservation in Textus Receptus.
No,
so not
no,
for
I never said that.
Array.
No, I said King James is the preserved word of God. I never said the
So
Textus
Textus
Receptus.
Receptus isn't important. It's just the King
I believe
James.
the Textus Receptus is a better Greek text than the Alexandrian or the Nestles or the UBS.
Yeah, Sam, let me ask you, have you ever read the introduction or the preface to the original 1611 text?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
at least
everything that I've heard you and Joe say, basically, has been contrary to what the King James translators themselves say in this
Right.
this
What you're going to say
introduction.
is that they didn't claim inspiration. Basically, right?
They didn't even talk about inspiration. They didn't
Right.
claim to be doing the perfect translation.
Okay.
They said our translation is not perfect, and they anticipated criticism from other people before them who would say, why are you changing things? Why don't you just go with the English translations we already have?
Right. Well, one of the things that they did say was that their translation would be maligned on two sides. One by popish persons, of course that was talking about the Roman Catholic Church, or by self-conceited brethren that give liking to nothing but that which is hammered on their own anvil.
Like the people who did other English translations
Well,
before
that's a
them.
pretty good application, all right? The King James translators didn't have to say what I'm giving you is inspired. Caiaphas at one point in John prophesied that Jesus Christ, it was better for Jesus Christ to die for the nation than that the nation die. He did not say, God told me to say. It even says in the Bible, he didn't know he was prophesying. So there's a man that was being used of God to say something he had no idea he was doing. I'm not saying
So
that...
you know a lot more about whether it was inspired and perfect than the King James translators did. Is that
Besides,
right?
that's a pretty bad argument from silence. Good grief, the Geneva Bible
All right, I'll give you
translators
an
didn't say
argument.
that. Maybe they're inspired.
All right.
NIV translators didn't say it. Maybe they're inspired.
John chapter 1, they came to John the Baptist. They asked him, are you the Christ? No. Are you that prophet? No. Are you Elijah? No. That is an absolute no. He said, chapter 11, Jesus Christ says of John the Baptist, if you will accept it, this is Elijah, which was for to come. John said, I'm not Elijah. Jesus Christ said he was. He was, not reincarnated Elijah. He was in the spirit and power of Elijah. Had they accepted Jesus Christ as their Messiah in Matthew chapter 11, that's how the forthcoming of Elijah would have been fulfilled through John the Baptist. John the Baptist was Elijah in spirit and power, did not know it. He claimed, point blank, I am not. Say what you want. That's
what does this
I'm
have to
saying
do
what
with the
they
discussion?
said. And if we could raise
Right.
them back from the dead right now, they'd be astonished to hear you say that. They would probably tar and feather you.
I imagine John the Baptist would have been astonished if somebody walked up to him and said, you are Elijah.
But Dr. Giff, all of this is extremely circular, and I think we need to, in fairness, point out the fact that what you're saying is not what Dr. Strauss has said in regards to the preservation of the text. Dr. Strauss has said earlier on that Christians in mass have always believed this traditional text, and that's where the basis of it lies. But the problem is there are a number of places in the King James text. Luke 2:22, to give you an example. You just said that those men who gathered in that room and were involved in the translation of the King James Version, that God somehow was doing something there. They didn't say that. Their contemporaries didn't
right.
say that. This is something that's come along a lot later, and I think it's very circular to just get into that argument. But to Dr. Strauss, what about places where those King James translators followed conjectural emendations? I looked at the Greek text, and all the Greek texts say the same thing, but he didn't like the way it went. And so he changed the word holy to the future form of the verb to be, sort of to make it nice and poetic and rhythmic. And your King James this day reads that way, even though there's not a question, I think, about on anyone's part as to what that passage actually reads. Why should I take Theodore Bays's conjectural emendation, where he decides a reading on the basis of what he likes, and say that the mass of Christians believe this when nobody before Theodore Beza ever had the idea that Revelation 16:5 read that way? Why should I believe that?
Well, I believe it gets back to faith in the doctrine of preservation, actually, and the scripture verses that speak to this issue. Matthew 4:4, as I said before, where are the every words? Believers have felt that the every words have been preserved to them in every generation, and that God has used God has used various means to give that preserved word. Take, for instance, Johannine Common. It doesn't have much textual
even
support.
Bernard.
Well, let me just say what, I actually have the preface here to the 1611, and I've got the 1611 sitting next to me here. And let me just read what they said here about, this was a note to the reader right in the front. They said, first of all, neither did we think much to consult the translators or commentators, the Chaldean, the Hebrew, Syrian, Greek, or Latin, no, nor the Spanish, French, Italian, or Dutch. Neither did we disdain to revise that which we had done, and to bring back to the anvil that which we had hammered. In other words, when they consulted these things, the thing that they had written, if they said, in consulting all these others, if that wasn't right, they went back and they changed it. Then they went on and they said something about this thing of certainty. There may be many words in the Scripture which be never found there but once, so that we cannot be helped by conference of places. In other words, the context doesn't help us out, and we still don't know what the word means. So what are we supposed to do? He says there can be rare names of certain birds, beasts, precious stones. There can be all kinds of things that they list here. He says, now in such a case, doth not a margin do well to admonish the reader to seek further, and not to conclude or dogmatize upon this or that peremptorily? For as it is a fault of incredulity to determine of such things as the Spirit of God hath left questionable, can be no less than presumption. So these guys said, there's stuff, even after we've checked all these sources, we don't know. What do? They put it in the margin. Okay? Now that's what Art's done over here, and you guys have said he's wrong for doing what the guys who wrote the 1611 did.
No, there's 8,422 marginal notes in the King James, and that indicates that they realize exactly what they've said there.
I agree with you, Tom, and the fact is that if they did it, why isn't it okay for these guys to do it?
But
I'm not complaining about that. I'm not complaining about the
I'm not
marginal
complaining
note.
about that
I'm
either.
complaining about their translation.
Excuse me, Dr. Strauss, if you represent the same type of position that is taken by D.A. Waite, he said, in regards to the New King James, he said the diabolical nature of the New King James Version, diabolical is a strong term, shows itself in their printing all the various readings of the Greek text in the footnotes. They print all sides and take their stand in favor of none of them. By so doing, they confuse the readers. The editors have made no decisions as to what God's words really are. If that isn't confusing, you think about it. Is that not the position that is expressed by a number of King James only advocates? That's Dr. Waite.
Right, that's Dr. Waite's position, but I believe some of the footnotes there represent the Nestle Allen text, and I think that's what he's alluding
Well, it
to.
represents Greek manuscripts. It'd be there. I happen to agree with the King James translation, only begotten Son. John uses it elsewhere, and it fits better with the idea of begotten. And
beget a God.
well, I agree, but the thing is,
the word monogenes probably does not mean beget.
That's right.
but many believe that it does, but we won't argue that. But the point is, the marginal note there is just telling people that there are manuscripts which read God
That
there.
challenges the purity of the reader.
But
to
the
think-
same thing is done. I've got a gift for you,
But
Joe.
not on the basis of this.
Well, I've got a gift for you. I'm going to give you the 1611, and it has those. I'm in Acts, and it says, Acts 3:15, and killed the Prince of Life, whom God hath raised from the dead, whereof we are. And the margin says, or author. The Greek word can mean prince or leader or file. I can't remember if this is the same word in Hebrews or not. I don't have the Greek. But anyway, in other words, author is another good.
That doesn't seem, though, to be on the same
No,
level.
that's right. It's not
as
the
when you're talking about an only begotten Son or an only begotten God.
I just picked this one at random. In other words, marginal notes do not mean unbelief or wickedness or. I mean, I've been accused of a number of heinous crimes that I've never done.
I don't think
Not by you.
that Gail Ripplinger ever intended, and I can't really speak for her. I'm not here to defend her. Her writing is not perfect. I don't think there are such
agree on
things
that.
as
Oh,
anything
boy.
perfect but the Bible.
Inspired.
So I'm here to defend a perfect Bible,
just another
not a
stream.
perfect Gail Ripplinger. Okay? She's a very precious lady and has done a marvelous job. But you see, I'd rather have a imperfect book by Gail Ripplinger than to have your imperfect Bible.
Well,
That's
you're welcome to
very,
it.
very important.
But isn't that
can
just
have
a
it.
preference?
You know what Mrs. Ripplinger said? I saw this on TV after, I believe Dr. James Price, our Old Testament Hebrew professor, wrote to her a very gracious letter. He lives here in Chattanooga. That her response was from his letter. I can't prove that, but it was soon after. And James was good enough to put it on my answering machine. So when I came home, I turned on the machine, and there was Gail Ripplinger, and she said this: "I have since found out that some of the translators," this is a direct quote, "I have since found out that some of the translators of the New King James are sweet and godly men," end quote. And she went on to say, but I want to be fair, we were deceived, we didn't know what we were going to produce, and then there it is. And I worked with these sweet and godly men, and she's right on that. But it's not true that we were deceived. We opened every meeting in prayer,
right.
a devout spiritual group who love the Lord and also love the King James
All right,
Version.
we're out of time, and next week we're going to look at some of the things that Gail Ripplinger has stated about you guys in the new translations, and I hope that you'll join us.